Afternoon, America. Brian James Blam here, and welcome you back to another episode of What the Fuck's Up. What do I want to talk about today? I want to talk about this international war that deeply impacts America. It's been taking place for a very, very long period of time, and it's important to you as Americans because it determines how your domestic policy and your foreign policy are going to function. It determines whether your nation is going to send you and your children to war, whether it's going to take your tax dollars, rip them right out of your wallet even before you get paid, and send them over to another country like Israel or Egypt or something along those lines. And so this is a religious war that deeply impacts you because of the politics. This is not a video that's a critique of any particular religion. I'm not criticizing Judaism. I'm not criticizing Christianity. I'm not criticizing Islam. I'm talking about the politics of religion and nation states and how that impacts you, the American people, and your country, because what your country decides to do. Does it look the other way when atrocities happen? Does it intervene when atrocities happen? These are all decisions that are made because of this religious conflict. And it's really important because a lot of people are talking today and asking the question, how does Israel, the state of Israel, have so much power and control over the United States government? Right? We've long had a very close relationship with the nation state of Israel. And so a lot of people today believe that Israel actually controls the U.S. government and U.S. politics. I won't go that far, but I will say they have very, very deep influence. I mean, look at Mark Levine, right? This commentator, political commentator says, you're not an American if you don't support Judaism. What Mark Levine is really saying is, if you don't support the government of Israel and what it wants to do, then you are not an American. He's conflating Judaism with Israel, the state, and they're two separate things, right? Israel's not a theocratic government. It is a representative parliamentary system of government. And so you get people like Lindsey Graham, right? You're not a Republican if you don't support Israel. Right? And so they're trying to define the MAGA movement. Make Israel great again, we'll make America great again, whatever. This is a division of the MAGA movement, an effort to divide the Republican Party, an effort to divide Christianity, and an effort to divide Americans. How does your enemy defeat you? It divides you into subgroups, right? And that's exactly what's taking place with this religious war. So let's take a look. Let's sort of go back to 1800. We could go back 4,000 years and talk about Gaza City, which has been around that long, how many times it's been destroyed. But, we won't do that because, that will take us forever. We're going to go back to the 18th century and we're going to sort of look at what's been happening, especially with the government of Israel, the creation of Israel, and how it behaves and how it impacts the United States, right? So, 18th century, the Israeli or the Jews living in Israel, in Europe, begin to have these, Enlightenment period in which what's the best way for the Jewish people to move forward? And it becomes the widespread belief that they just need to go out and live amongst their fellow Europeans, which is largely Christendom at the time. The population in Europe was overwhelmingly Christian in numbers, right? So they believe they just need to go out and live amongst the Christians and everything will be fine. Not disavow their Judaism, continuing to practice Judaism, but just living amongst their fellow man, the Christians, right? That's the best way to move forward. Doesn't really work out that way. There's a great deal of backlash, what's known as anti-Semitism, this hatred or dislike of the Jewish people. And so as we look at this, basically what we're looking at is sort of the Jewish people not necessarily as just a faith, right? But the Jewish people as sort of almost an ethnicity or a race. And a lot of members of the Jewish community have this belief that Judaism is a race, right? And so in the 19th century, in an effort to change directions, the Jewish philosophers began having conversations about, hey, maybe the best way to move forward is that the Jewish people need to live in their own state so that they can practice the fine art of self-determination, protect themselves, and they don't have to worry about this government oppression and repression and being, killed by their neighbors because they happen to be members of the Jewish community, right? And so a journalist in 19th century Europe coined this term Zionism. And Zionism is very, very nationalistic. And nationalism, folks, people who practice nationalism are very much collectivists, right? Socialists. They believe that the whole is composed of the sum of its parts. If you look at the U.S. political philosophy, it's very atomized. It's like the greatest good is the individual should have as much freedom as possible so that individual can flourish and achieve what they can achieve, right? It's different in a very nationalistic community because they believe in the whole above the individual. That's a very important concept because if the whole is more important than the individual, just like my individual body, my whole is very important to my individual as a self, then I can remove cancers from my body to preserve myself, right? So I can get rid of parts of my body to preserve myself. And that's sort of one of the problems with these collectivist identities is that when the whole becomes greater than its individual parts, that's when you have this nationalistic fervor that takes over. So very collectivistic, or what I'm going to put here is, I'm just going to put the concept of socialism, because that's basically the concept, right? Socialistic beliefs are very, very collectivistic. And Zionism is also very, very much into purity of the Jewish people, right? And so if we call them the Jewish people as opposed to the Jewish faith, right, it's very difficult to become a Jew, right? You can convert to Judaism. There are very, very strict rules regulating the conversion of Judaism. Or if you want to come out as a Jew, you have to be able to prove that you have Jewish lineage. And I think it's a grandparent. You got to be able to show at least one of your grandparents was of the Jewish faith. And then you can claim Jewish heritage, right? So Jewish heritage, again, back to this concept of collectivism, right? This nation, this common identity. And so basically what happens in the 19th century, or the turn of the century, right? You have a lot of this Zionism floating around Europe in the Jewish community. They convinced the British government, which had taken Palestine from the Ottoman Empire. And so the British become the governors of Palestine. And so Britain opens the doors to European Jews to emigrate from this European anti-Semitism into Palestine to start new homes, to build their own communities. And what begins to happen when that happens, right? You have people living in Palestine. And so you get this flood of Jews start in the late 19th century, early 20th century, flood out of Europe into Palestine and thereby displace the Palestinian people who were once living there, right? And so you get this phenomena take place. But then you get, sort of the rise of Nazism. Nazism on the European continent, led by Adolf Hitler. And what is Nazism? Nazism is nationalism, right? The German identity, the Aryan, the pure Aryan. There's another word right there. Purity, very much into purity. The Nazi Party is the National Socialist Workers, German Workers' Party. Right, and so it's very, very socialist. In fact, National Socialism has a very bad name. because most people associate it with Nazism, right? And so basically, what do we have here? We have Zionism, we have Nazism, we have this anti-Semitism, this anti-Jewish sentiment pushing these very, very nationalistic Jewish people out of Europe and into Palestine. And so 1939, right? By 1939, Europe, or the rest of the world, begins to close its doors to Jewish immigration from Europe, right? The United States. FDR would only allow about a third of the Jewish population that sought asylum in the United States to actually immigrate to the United States. If you had money or if you had a science background, we would take you, but most of you Jewish people can just remain in Europe and deal with it, right? And so you have their only real outlet becomes Palestine. They can't go to South America, Central America, Mexico, because Germany had established very, very close ties to those nations late 19th century, early 20th century, during Germany's period of industrial revolution, right? And so there's nowhere for them to go. Right? So the European Jews in 1939, Great Britain says no more emigration to Palestine, right? They try to appease the other Europe or the Middle Eastern countries in the region who are tired of the Jewish immigration coming and pushing the Palestinians out of their homelands. So they say enough is enough, no more. We have to stop it. We got to worry about World War II. And that traps the remaining European Jews in Europe. And so we know that the result of that was, Adolf Hitler could no longer have them exported, which was wrong in the first place, right? You can't just take people's shit and make them move, right? If it's their home, it's their home. And so what they were doing by forcing the Jewish populations out of Europe was just flat wrong, regardless of who was doing it. And it wasn't just Adolf Hitler in the Third Reich. But in 1941, they issue forth the final solution, and we know that leads to the Holocaust, right? And so what begins to happen then after World War II? The world unites under the United Nations, and we take these Palestinian lands, Palestine, in the Middle East, and we designate them the nation state of Israel, right? We give them their homeland, what the Zionists have been pushing for. And so you have the creation of Israel, and Israel continues to exist for a long time. Egypt takes back control over the Palestinian territories. And then you have 1963 roll around, right? And so you have this 6-day war between Egypt and Israel. Israel wins, and then it goes into the remaining Palestinian territories and sets up a government, and then begins to push more Israelis or more Jews into those Palestinian territories so that it can people and populate them, thereby displacing more Palestinians, right? This gives rise to a long and heated conflict brought by the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And in 1993, Israel says, okay, enough. We're going to allow Palestine to govern itself. And so Israel, the government of Israel, withdraws from Palestine and allows the Palestinian self-government, right? They've got a representative government that, people vote and they choose who they want to represent them. In 2006, Hamas takes power, right, politically in Israel. And Hamas doesn't care about the Palestinian people. Hamas wants to exterminate Israel, wipe it from the face of the earth, wipe it from the map. And so it leads to a great deal of conflict between Israel and Palestine, the remaining nations of Palestine. You have the West Bank on the west side of Israel, and then you have the Gaza Strip on the east side. And so, how do they have so much influence in the United States? How do they have the power to displace so many people, to wage these wars that result in the wholesale slaughter of men, women, and children who otherwise are unable to defend themselves from this very wealthy Israeli state that the United States funds to the tune of billions of dollars a year, including military weapons and supplies that they can engage in this wholesale slaughter with. Right. And so, this conflict has lasted in Palestine for so long because, as the Jewish populations were pushed out of Europe by the National Socialism of the Europeans at the time, they move into Palestine and do the exact same thing to the Palestinian people. Right. And so looking at how do we support this, right? How do the American people support this time after time after time, war after war after war, right? Well, it's called Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism. And this is comes out of the Old Testament, very, very much advanced by the very, very active and extensive Jewish lobby in the United States. Folks, they're not just targeting your politicians, they're targeting your Christian faith. They're targeting your Christian churches. That's where they spend most of their time because they're pushing this concept of Christian Zionism. And Christian Zionism, right, is this belief that, you have this war raging between good and evil as the Jewish people struggle to reclaim the Holy Lands, right? Well, it just labels the Palestinians evil and the Jewish faith good, right? Good versus evil, right? The devil versus God. And we have all of this war taking place. The ultimate end being, right, that once the Jewish people, once the nation of Judea take over all of the Holy Lands and control them, then we will have the second return of Christ, right? And so it's this Christian belief that's very, very actively advanced by the Israeli Zionists, by the Jewish Zionists, that gets many, many, many people in the United States of America to support allowing Israel to do whatever Israel wants to do regardless, right? That's changing. American public perception is changing because Americans are coming to understand that, quite frankly, what Israel is doing in the Middle East is wrong and has been wrong on many levels for a very long period of time. But this is how they have such a deep influence within the United States. They control your Christian churches, right? And one really good example, the best example, is Turning Point USA. Turning Point USA was born a Zionistic Christian organization. And what do? They target young men on campuses so that they can educate them in the proper form of Christianity with this Zionistic tenet, right? That until the Jews control the Holy Land, well, Jesus is just not going to come back, right? So Jewish control of the Holy Land is a condition precedent for the second coming of Christ. That, folks, is how the Israeli people, the Zionists within Israel and within the United States, have so much power over U.S. public policy, right? U.S. foreign policy, this concept of Zionism. And so, the United States, we need to take a long, hard look. I mean, Charlie Kirk took a long, hard look, right? He had an epiphany on August 7th, was it 7th or 8th, 2023, when Hamas invaded Israel. And he became to believe that the Israeli National Security Forces, the IDF, issued a stand-down order to allow that invasion to happen so that Israel would have justification to do whatever it wanted in the Palestinian territories. And that's essentially what happened, folks. And so Charlie Kirk began to have a change of heart with respect to Christian Zionism and this carte blanche support of Israel and Israeli policy, and allowing Israel to do just whatever it wants to do. What we need to do is we need to stop the wholesale slaughter of Palestinians that's taking place. Hamas is a huge problem. One big step in Trump's peace plan is that Hamas goes. They're no longer in the government. Another big step that people miss is Trump has been very active in trying to get the Israeli government to issue Netanyahu a pardon, right? Why won't Netanyahu leave? If Netanyahu fears his enemies are going to imprison him for what he has been doing in the Palestinian territories, he's never going to leave power. But if he's given a pardon, he might just leave. And that would solve one big part of the problem. But America, you have to understand this religious war that's taking place because they actively work to see, to shape how our young people, how Christians in America view Israel, and how Christians in America view, their religious beliefs with respect to the second coming of Christ. And so, America, if you want to condemn me for saying Israel is doing wrong, then condemn away. I don't care. With that, I'm going to say peace.